Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Splinter. So, I think the main appeal of this film is it's an hour and 20 minutes. It's a really simple film. It eventually just kind of becomes a movie where the people are trying to outsmart what is to be this splinter fungus thing. And so eventually this splinter fungus is to latch onto a person, and that person is to become a zombified version of themselves. And then eventually that zombified version of a person is to eventually not even have to bite another person. It's basically just to, like, any little sharp part of this person, of this zombie, eventually touches another person and they're basically just infected. They're basically effed unless there is to be a extreme measure which eventually someone is to eventually take within this film. But yeah, so it's a really simple film. I would say for people to go out of their way to watch it. Really, some people may not like the grossness maybe of a monster of this, but again, I don't think you really, like, I don't think the monster is really in your face. Like, I don't think you can see the monster clearly throughout this entire film. So I honestly would just tell people, like, no matter how gory that this movie may seem, like, you barely see much of anything. So justifiably, like, whatever people are to think about this film, just watch it anyways. Just go ahead and check it out. And then eventually you can just stop this movie at whatever point. Just be like, yeah, this is not my film. Because really, like, I don't think that this movie is legitimately scary. Like, I think it's just a fun film. But people might feel differently. It's okay. Anyways, but I like this movie. It's simple, and it's like, I think it's a good enough film. That's what it should be. Good enough. So, like, it's good because it, yeah. Anyways, pushing on. So, what is this movie about? Just a fair warning for everybody. Like, I'm kind of in the moment of right now because it's like at the real tail end of the day. Plus, I had to kind of do some side projects before I had to finish this up. So I'm just like, man, I just want to. Can I just rest my head right now and sleep for 2 hours while this is just continuing to record, and then I'm just good. No, I can't. So there's that going for me to just try to, like, let's get this one in the books. But me whining and boohooing and complaining because I had to do some things. I had to go out and accomplish things. So yeah. So going in this film, I like this film. It's good. Some people may feel differently. Some people may think it's garbage. I don't really care. Because to each their own. Check out a trailer of it. You might just be like, okay, this is not for me, or okay, I'm going to watch this film now that I have the solid approval of this guy telling you to. So, teeing it up, what is this movie about? So, it seems we have two couples. On the one hand, we have a couple that is going camping. That is to be a misfire. And we have these other two couples that are basically just living off of fumes because they are to thief their way to make it to supposedly Mexico. And while that all goes horribly awry, we end up having all four of these people come all together into one vehicle to eventually go into, let's just say, the wrong gas station, to eventually find a gas station attendant who seems to be splinterified or splinter fungus-fied, because supposedly that's the name of this monster, is a splinter fungus, supposedly, that evidently had latched itself onto an animal in the forest, which eventually latched itself onto a man that is a gas station attendant. So eventually what ends up happening is we have to take the whole movie to try to figure out how to outsmart this thing, or to figure out what its weakness is, to figure out that, like, okay, it seems that this thing only goes after a certain kind of uh, like a certain kind of thing, like whatever is the hottest, or whatever is the coldest, or whatever is the oldest, or whatever. We'll get to that. So whatever tastes like chicken the most, we'll eventually tell you what exactly that is. But anyways, so there is at points in times where maybe this movie may be too gory for you. There is at one point in time in this movie that we just kind of have a hand kind of by itself, just kind of roaming around with this kind of like blackish, splinterish thing coming out the end of it. So maybe that might not be a movie for you. There is at one point where there's to be this hand with an arm attached to it that is eventually going and trying to attack our would-be people. And again, there's splinters coming from out the back end of that, and maybe that might not be a good movie for you. We eventually have a monster that seems to be just collected parts of corpses. Again, your discretion. Really, you can barely see it in the movie. Really, you can barely make it out. So, like, probably the grossest part is probably going to be when eventually people start, like, snapping their freaking fingers, and, like, people's fingers and arms and stuff start bending a weird way. So maybe that might be a thing for you to not be interested in this movie. But again, it barely happens really in this. Well, that probably happens more than anything else that I've just mentioned previously in certain seconds beforehand, of any gross things that could just be like, oh no, I don't like that kind of film, sir. So, I don't know. People have weird tolerances of things, and some people have no tolerances, whatever. They can go ahead and watch, like, any film and just be like, yeah, I'm not scared at all, or I'm not going to barf right now. Because people have weird tolerances. So, let's go into it. Let's go into that double five time territory, because it's that customary time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time we get to spoil this movie. Hopefully I teed it up good enough, because really I was like, this is like, what am I going to have much to say in the spoiler territory when I basically give up the movie, because there's not much to give up. It's just a lot of outsmarting and technical things that eventually these people are to, like. And plus, the reason why I saw this film is because I ended up seeing a gas station movie called Burn a while ago, and I was like, you know what, like, hasn't there been some gas station movies where, like, it was all like from the gas station mostly? Because I was trying to think of what this film was, because I'm like, wasn't there a zombie movie that had something to do with gas station besides Zombieland? And then I rethought of this movie. I'm like, oh yeah, like, I want to figure out what this movie was. So hilariously, I had to figure out who the actors were in this movie, and then figure out what the movie was. Because I was putting in, like, zombie gas station movie, and that wasn't helping. So I had to figure out who the actors were, and then I kind of figured it out, luckily. So let's go into this. So, spoilers now for everybody who doesn't know. So, spoilers. So, beginning of the film, really, it's to be, like, my main focus is to be on the gas station attendant, who is to be Charles Baker, who a lot of people will probably know from Breaking Bad. I was like, hey, that's a guy from Breaking Bad. Like, wow, that's weird. And so, evidently, his name is Charles Baker, and he plays Blake Sherman Jr., so his name is Blake. Anyways, so Blake is to eventually go and just be kind of sitting around, because, like, I guess there's no business by this gas station, or maybe it's a slow gas day. Plus, it seems like this guy just like lives in the middle of nowhere. So how is he expecting to get a lot of business in this gas station? But what do I know? Maybe there's certain gas stations that have to be just plotted every X amount of miles for whatever reason. So Blake is to be going and finishing up, I think, his little thing of chips to all of a sudden be hearing some animal in the background. And so Blake is like, "Hey, I ain't got nothing. I ain't got nothing." Like this very southern accent which I pulled out right now. And so Blake all of a sudden is to just keep continuing to hear whatever this animal is. It's a mutated animal that is to eventually be the splintered fungus thing. And so Blake, of course, is to get taken by this animal. And you would think that Blake would eventually just end up like in the middle of the road anywhere, or eventually when these people are to make it to the gas station, immediately be like, "Hey, what the heck is that?" And they would just drive off, but I guess not. Like this guy has to conveniently be in a spot where not everyone at the gas station can conveniently see him. But of course it does, because like what if he would have been in the very back of the building, and then like when eventually the girl is to use the pate, all of a sudden the guy has to walk around and like I would have believed that much more than him eventually going into the bathroom, because why was he in the bathroom? That doesn't quite make sense. Like if he was taking a crap and then he was like attacked by this animal, then I would buy that story more. Why am I going far too into this story? It makes no sense to do that. So anyways, so let's go on to the other stories. So we have both Holly and Seth, who I guess are to be doing an anniversary of some kind, or some kind of like they just want this romantic moment between the two of them. I don't remember exactly the actual moment or reason why they're doing this, but anyways, so Holly and Seth, like we have this couple who are probably kissing way too often. So it's like I wonder if either one of them or both of them are single, or why is it that they kiss so often? Maybe they were just like, hey, like after this movie, you and me, bang, bang, bang. You know what I'm saying? No. Anyways, so, but there's a lot of kissing going on for whatever reason. Even when Seth is like, hey, don't kiss me that much because reasons. I'll get to it later. So, uh, so Polly and Seth are acting like this newlywed couple and whatever. So they go and they try to put this tent together and they end up breaking the tent. And so Seth is like, well, do you have like 10 extra tents just in case we break them all? And Polly's like, ooh. And Seth is like, yeah, well, I guess we're just going to have to go to a hotel. Because, like, if we have no tent, then what are we going to do? Just sleep in the car and just, like, pretend that the car is a tent? That'll probably work out, right? No? All right. Well, Polly and Seth are going to go off to some hotel, and Seth is just like, well, how about we get the most ghetto hotel possible? Like the worst possible hotel. We'll go and we'll get that. Like, we'll get a hotel so horrible that's filled with bugs and all kinds of things that'll be so close to being outside. Like, and so Polly's like, you being honest? And Seth's like, sure, yeah, we'll get the crappiest hotel we can find. And it'll feel like we'll be outside. And so Polly's like, okay. So all of a sudden, we end up having couple number two, who is both Dennis and Lacey. And Lacey is kind of cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, but, like, I'm not sure the reason why. Like, does she need medication to eventually, like, straighten up? Or, like, maybe since she doesn't have a hit of her drugs, like, maybe her drugs straighten her out? I'm not quite sure. So anyways, it seems that Dennis's car is like, the engine is gone, and so they can't make it any further out. So eventually Dennis is taking everything that they have left, and he's just chucking off to the side, because he's like, well, hey, we're gonna go and we're gonna get new stuff. We're just gonna find new things. And I'm just like, for people that are probably like living on fumes, like I would take every small little like, cause survival like kicks in. Like you don't know how many times like a little coat or something like that may come in handy, or any number of things that they are to have. Um, Hence why eventually I would love to be in like a forcible like survival scenario where I'm just like the person that's like, well, hey, I coincidentally packed for everything. Or I just like, yeah, I had the bare essentials, but what my bare essentials were the was like one important thing. Um, because you would probably like to have that just one important thing that no one else thought of. They're like, oh yeah, I just brought a coat. I just brought a coat and a pair of slacks. They're like, well, hey, I brought rain gear. And they're like, oh, rain gear? Yeah, that was my one thing. Yeah, I didn't think of that. So, pushing on. So, Dennis and Lacey are both huffing it. They're kind of thumbing it. They're hitchhiking, much more hiking than hitching, down the road. And so, eventually, Polly and Seth are to be good Samaritans, and so they end up seeing both these people off the side of the road. So they're like, "Well, hey, should we like pull over? Should we be nice to them? Because they're not going to go and turn around and betray us, right?" So they're nice people, and so Polly and Seth pull off to the side, and I bet for the rest of their lives they will never do that again. They're never gonna ever do that again. So Dennis and Lacey are to pull a gun on these people. Because at first he was like, well, maybe we aren't gonna go and help them. But then eventually, because these guys looked really like creepy, and they were gonna drive off, but then the guy pulls a gun on them, and they're like, okay, well, I guess we have to take them now. So they have to figure out, because Dennis wants one of them in the back seat and one of his in the front seat. So so they end up doing that. So they end up driving off, and so it seems that they end up getting a flat tire from an animal that they end up running over. And so now they have to replace this tire. It seems that Dennis ends up touching the old tire and ends up getting a splinter on his finger. Ooh, I wonder what's going to happen with this character. So, but he ends up pulling it out. So, they replace the tire, and then what ends up happening is Lacey is to bizarrely now be in this like crazy mode. And so Lacey is to mention that maybe it's possible that this animal is some animal that supposedly her and Dennis had named Ginger. I guess Ginger is probably a fairly common name for a dog, because I even know like my grandmother had a dog named Ginger at one point, and so I was like, this seems like a real common name, I guess. I don't know, but anyways, so I never named my dogs Ginger. They're always like B word letters, like Boo or Bubbles or something like that. And like my cats were always like T names, like Tasha or Thomas, or and then we switched to like our latest one that's Autumn for whatever reason. Why am I talking about pets here? I don't know. It's some sidebar thing. So weirdly, Lacey is to want Seth to just like touch this thing or to like take care of this thing. And Seth is like, I don't even know what this is. Is it a dog? Is it a cat? Is it a thing that's going to kill me? Yeah, it is. Because there's something wrong with it. It looks like almost like a porcupine, probably by this time now. So it seems that Seth is to go and almost like touch at it, but it seems like it's going to attack him. And so he's like, yeah, no, I'm not going to touch that. And so they end up running away from it. And so Lacey's like, that thing tried to attack us. And Seth is like, yeah, I think like the tail of it tried to attack me weirdly. So they're like, Yeah, let's get the heck out of here. We have the new spare tire. Let's just drive until we can't drive anymore. So all of a sudden, like, we also end up seeing that this car is leaking something. It looks like probably antifreeze or like something blue. It's not leaking blood because blood would be red. Or blued? Blued. Anyways, so they drive on until they get to this gas station, and supposedly the car is overheating. And so now they have to stop to this gas station, and Dennis is telling Seth to pump for gas. Lacey is saying, "I gotta take a huge dump. I gotta take the Browns to the Super Bowl. I gotta, like take a." And so Dennis is like, "Okay, go on." And or no, wait, he's like, "Can't you just hold it? Like, there's another gas station that's gonna be nearby." And Lacey's like, "No, I want to go." And so he's like, "Go ahead." So Dennis is to go into the gas station with Polly, and so they're waiting for the guy to pay for gas, and they're going to wait a really long time because that guy does not exist. So while they're waiting, Dennis is just popping open certain kind of candies. I think it's like peanut butter M&Ms or something. Like, man, he should have went for the peanuts, but no, he didn't. What a schla. What a son of a... You should have went for the good candy, man. The good candy. But it seems like they have overly generic stuff. I wonder if there was any problem with sponsorship on this thing, or maybe there was certain stuff that they purposely put in there as sponsorship. I don't know. Because it looks like at points in time you could see candy and stuff like that. But I don't know if there was any kind of sponsorship that they probably got out of that movie. Probably not. Because it was probably just like, oh, like we weren't gonna put like generic goods in there that have no names or whatever. That would have like looked awful. Or maybe you couldn't really tell the logos or whatever, so they didn't have to pay anybody or nobody had to pay them or whatever. Anyways, pushing on. I'm wasting too much time. There's too much time to be wasted. Anyways, so Lacey is to go and want to take a huge dump, but she seemingly can't open the door. And so then eventually she ends up trying to open the door. And then she ends up seeing the gas station attendant who's on the ground, who is to be this gross looking man of sorts. And so this woman is like, "Oh, like, I'm sorry, occupado, I guess." But then she ends up finding out that there's something wrong with this guy. And so she's like, "Yeah, I'm never going to use that bathroom again. I'm going to go and take a huge dump off to the side of the road instead of going to that bathroom because there's something wrong with that guy. And there must have been something going on with that bathroom to cause this guy to be this weird." So Lacey is running out into the gas pumps. And so eventually Seth is to eventually run into the gas station. And so what ends up happening is that Lacey ends up taking a fall and freaking, I think she's to like snap her neck or something. She ends up kind of hurting herself where she basically dies instantly. And then all of a sudden this creature who is to now seemingly go after the car and just be weirdly on top of the car for a long stretch of time. And so eventually they're like, what the heck is going on with this thing? And so because this thing is so consumed with the car, Dennis might assume that this thing is dead. And so he ends up going out to grab after Lacey and drag her back into the store. And because he weirdly just sees her arm moving, so he assumes that she's still alive. Dumb mistake. Does it look like her face is moving? Then, like, I don't care if her eyes aren't closed, she's dead. So Dennis is trying to get some response out of Lacey, and then he's basically to say, like, well, hey, I'm going to drag you back into the store. And he can also see the big trail of blood that he is to also be dragging her. Like, what is he going to do to help her once she gets into the store? I'm confused. So Dennis just drags Lacey into the store, but then eventually her arm just starts to like snap up and try to go after Dennis. And so all of a sudden, they now are just like, she's one of them. And so they end up, they try to close the door, and like this woman's hand just gets slammed and crackled and broken off. And so all of a sudden, this hand is just now in this, like, just standing upright and is consuming this black blood. And so Seth is just like, wait a minute, everybody, wait a minute, like, let's figure out what this is. Let's figure things out. And so to just kind of see if this thing is going to attack them or whatever. And because supposedly, like, Seth has this biology degree, like he's eventually going to become a doctor in biology. So all of a sudden he's like, wait a minute, everyone. Like, he's pulling like the Mark Wahlberg thing where it's like, wait a minute, everybody. And so he's trying to figure out what this thing is or what this thing does. And so he's like weirdly, this thing desperately needs this black goop to survive. And it seems to be coursing in and out of its body. So it's like probably just going to eventually just die off, right? So eventually he's starting to realize what this is. And so eventually what ends up happening is that they eventually just go and just wait it out. Because this monster is like still out there, and for them to try and make a run for it or to go to any one car or something is just not going to work out. So eventually they just kind of wait it out, kind of eat some chips or some random items or whatever. And so because Polly is to go after the phone, but Dennis is to go and break the phone because he doesn't want the cops being called, because he knows that he'll get arrested once this whole thing is to be over anyways. So there's that. So eventually what they also end up trying to do, but I guess this kind of happens after like the sheriff comes. They end up taking one back door and eventually try to take it off its hinges, but they end up just finding another door in front of that. This be this like locked up door. I'm like, of course. Like, there can't just be this convenient one door there. There has to be like two doors, and then one door has to be convenient to where they can't get out of the other door. Of course. But yeah, so they weirdly have to do that in this movie. So uh so eventually what ends up happening is that the sheriff is to come and is to try to like call like the other like police officers, like uh 514 coming in, like, hey, like, get it while it's hot kind of thing. And so like she's trying to call for help, and like it seems like no one's reporting in. And so you would have thought that this sheriff's car would have parked right in front of this thing, to where like she'd be like right in front of where, like right in front of the store, like directly where she can easily just kind of like, but I guess not. I guess she didn't need gas. So anyways, now I don't know why randomly this sheriff just appeared, because like unless there was like a noise complaint coming from out in the middle of nowhere somewhere. But maybe the sheriff just coincidentally needed gas. Anyways, so the sheriff pops in and is to all of a sudden see the bloody mess that is to be left in front of this store, which has nothing to do with these people. And so she's like, what's going on? Oh, Dennis, you're here? You must have caused all of this because you're on our most wanted list, I guess. Like, how is it that this woman immediately knows this guy and, like, because, like, I guess well, like, if he performed some kind of public crime, in this city, then maybe like the sheriff knows who that is. But like I would have thought that this would have been a guy like that did a crime out of town and is making his way to Mexico. But I guess that's just me. Anyways, so the sheriff is calling in, just like, "Hey man, help me out." And so like the people are desperately telling her, "Come into the convenience store. Come in here. Like talk to us in here. We'll explain everything to you." And even when they're trying to explain this to the sheriff, what do you think happens? What every single horror movie mistake always happens, where the sheriff is just like, "Well, whatever. I'm not going to listen to you." But there has to be a reason for all that massive amounts of blood that is just be scrolled all over the store. And eventually this girl could have went into the convenience store, held a gun on Dennis, and like still like they could have been like, "Oh, thank God that you're here. Like now we're gonna tell you what's all going on. So you're gonna be able to we're gonna be able to tell you this all in the safety of this whole spot." So, but yeah, so Seth is starting to notice that this thing is now on the rooftop of this building, is trying to like go back and forth through the rooftop of this building because I guess it can sense body heat. That's the thing where it goes after and attacks people, because whatever is the most heated thing, that's whatever this thing attacks. So weirdly, for whatever reason, so all of a sudden we're like, dude, the sheriff is freaking toast. This monster, like, the sheriff has taken too long to be standing out there. She's going to die. And plus, also, the sheriff has to die because that's always the rule in these horror movies. The sheriff always either has to die or has to be taken out so horribly that, like, they don't even, like, they don't get re-importance till like the very end of the film. That's what every horror movie setup will be. Like, go and check out like Urban Legends, where eventually like the rent-a-cop woman is to just be like seemingly taken out, but then eventually she gets one last lick in, and then eventually it's like, "Oh hey, I'm here to like I'm like I didn't think I'd ever get shot," and so she's fine. But whatever. So let's get back into it. So the sheriff ends up getting taken by this monster and ripped in half. And so Seth is like, "Oh my God, so this monster is only wanting to take half of this person's body and just put it within, like, kind of fuse parts and pieces into its own thing." And then you still don't see what exactly this thing looks like because you never do. So conveniently, what ends up happening is Seth is to notice that the sheriff's radio is to be outside the store. And so instead of going and trying to run for the radio and to run back, he decides to get all these like iron clothes hangers. So, like, I've recently seen Halloween, where Jamie Lee Curtis pokes Michael Myers with a iron hanger. And then in this movie, we have Seth who ends up taking these iron hangers and going and like putting this little stretch of things together to go and hook in this radio thing. I'm like, so people are completely giving up on iron hangers, but I've seen two movies fairly recently where these iron hangers have come in handy, you know? People are making mistakes. They're going and doing an upper grade of clothing hangers, and you're gonna regret it someday. So there's gonna be no weapon at your side to defend yourself when you're in your closet. Weirdly, anyway, so so Seth puts together this iron thing to hook in this radio, and all while that's going on, we start to see Dennis, who's getting a little finger snap action with his fingers, and eventually he just goes and grabs a towel and is like, "Oh yeah, I just stabbed myself accidentally." No, your finger just bent backwards grossly. So they end up going and getting this radio and trying to pull it in. Coincidentally, the monster is to try to put its hand into the one opening of this spot. And so all of a sudden, like, it's basically like, well, F the radio. Now we're having to like fend off this arm coming through. And so now they end up like breaking off the arm to where all of a sudden the arm is going and like crawling after them. And so now Dennis comes up with the great idea of hiding into the back of the cooler freezer part of the convenience store, because there's always like a behind the freezer part of this. So because there's to be all these like doors that are to lead back to this one freezer part. So because there's like milk and all that product in the very end of this. So eventually Dennis is to eventually be the one figuring that out, while weirdly we have this like crate, this metal crate separating both Seth and Polly from his hand. And so eventually Polly goes into the back of one of these doors to go back into this freezer, and then Seth kind of knocks this thing away and then eventually runs into the thing himself. And so all of a sudden the hand eventually stops doing what it's doing, because eventually like this spot is too cold to figure out where these people are. And so they're like, oh my god, the cold. Like it only realizes heat signatures because like it was weirdly like hugging the crap out of that car for whatever reason, because it was the hottest thing. It was the hottest, freshest new product out there, which was the car. So now Seth is to just realize, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do. Slather me up with some ice packs and get me as cold as humanly possible till his face just turns white or blue or whatever. And so he is to like try to get his body temp to a certain body temperature, and then eventually he's to go out there to try and get into the car. I'm like, why? Like, did they not have like fire extinguishers? Like in Predator, they just fire extinguished people, and that worked out. So they couldn't have figured that out in this movie to just fire extinguisher this guy. Maybe they weren't thinking of the science of it all. But I don't know. Maybe it was like, no, that wouldn't have worked. But maybe you could have just fire extinguished the monster, and it wouldn't have bothered that person. Thinking here, right? Like, dude, I've watched like The Blob recently. I remember Tremors. Like, it's always something to do with some fire extinguisher. Weirdly, I guess monsters just don't like the cold. I guess when really looking at it, like you get World of War, that are eventually they die by eventually getting a virus or a cold or a flu or something that they couldn't figure it out. So, in other words, everybody just go to the coldest climates possible, and you'll never hear about any alien thing going on ever again, unless you're to go on into be wherever the heck the John Carpenter or just the Thing is at. Then you made a mistake there. So maybe go to a place that's really cold but isn't like the Thing cold. Then you'll be good. So just don't go into any icy glacier places. Then I think you'll be really safe. So where was I going? So Seth eventually gets cold enough, and so now he's kind of slowly but surely trotting out to this car that eventually has no car keys and has no way of getting also a radio out to anybody. And so then Seth just forcibly decides that he's going to have to go and grab the shotgun that's in there, because that's all he could do. So while he's going out and doing that, the group is going and grabbing fireworks and chucking them out to eventually attract this monster, But eventually, the warmer and warmer that Seth gets, and the more fireworks that they try to chuck out, the more that this monster isn't buying it, and uh, eventually does go after Seth. And so Dennis goes and jumps out of the store eventually with a firework to chuck the firework out there. But like Dennis is like, "Hey, free meal," kind of thing. Like, "Hey, look at me! Like I'm over here." So eventually, what forcibly happens is Dennis, with only his one arm, is to try and close this door, but of course he just can't lock it because one arm, and he was trying to do this really quickly. So the monster ends up just bashing through the door, and so now both Polly and Dennis are now having to forcibly jump into one of the coolers and to just try to wait this thing out. Like Dennis's thought was eventually to just cause a wildfire that would probably call the police to there, but like that wasn't gonna work because eventually, like gas station would have probably lit up something and really exploded and would have probably killed them in the process. So, but yeah, so now this monster is just kind of like just stretching around and just like tossing around. So eventually, what happens is Seth is to come back in there and is to start shooting the thing, and all of a sudden there's to be these little fires that are to start in the process, and because eventually one of the fireworks start a little bit of flame, which is to all of a sudden like start things to start burning, and so eventually the like whatever is left of the monster is kind of going right into the flame, and so that makes it to where both Seth, Polly, and Dennis are trying to make a break for it, and so like Seth is trying to keep the thing at bay, but Dennis is just like, dude, just give it to me, just give me the shotgun, and you guys just run the heck out of here. And Seth is like, are you sure? And Dennis is like, sure, like give it to me. So Dennis goes and takes the shotgun. Seth and Polly run out of this store. Oh, I forgot about the whole like him losing. Hence why I said Dennis now has one arm. Because in the cooler, what ends up happening is Dennis's arm is getting more and more infected to where it's like up to almost like the shoulder now of infection. So he's like, okay, I need to lose this arm because it's getting really out of control. Like so much so to where like his knee or his elbow like freaking like breaks, and now he's in a huge amount of pain. So he's like, dude, just cut my arm off. So they end up having the crappiest knife, like just a box cutter, to try and cut this guy's arm. So eventually, what ends up happening is they end up having to break this guy's. When it comes down to the bone part, they end up having to use this big, cement brick to break this guy's arm, because like he can't like Seth can't cut through bone. So eventually the guy's arm is broken off, and then they chuck it out because it's still infected. And so uh, so Dennis is now like a one armed defense of this monstrous thing. And so eventually, like Dennis just tries to like block the monster because he runs out of bullets. So he ends up just kind of blocking the monster from the front of the door for both Seth and Polly to just basically just start to get a pretty good distance from this gas station. And so the gas station starts burning up, and so eventually Dennis realizes that he's done, and so Dennis is to give Polly this one thing from this bank because he wants to give this girl that he did something wrong to a fresh start. And so here's the keys to that, and you guys can go and go and do whatever you want with that. So Polly and Seth are to run off, and so Dennis is like, well, F it, like, Lacey, I'll see you soon. And so he ends up going and firing on the propane tank, and of course the propane tank lights this thing up, and then eventually it explodes. And so we are to assume that seemingly everything is taken care of, that eventually all these things are supposedly dead, but we aren't really guaranteed. But also, we're to naturally also just to assume that it's just a matter of time before something else is going to sprout out. And plus, also, both Polly and Seth are just to have to forcibly walk their way to the next city, to the next whatever, and who knows if they're going to really make it to where they need to go before something else comes out of the woods somewhere and tries to get at them. So this could be a happy ending, this could be a bad ending, we don't know. If there ever would have been a sequel to this, which I don't think there would have been, but still, if there would have been a sequel, because this movie could have easily made its money back. They could have probably done franchises of this easily, even though diminishing returns and whatever. But still, they could have at least done a second one. Like the first one was cheaply done enough. They could have done a sequel. I don't know. Anyways, so yeah. With that said, basically that's how this movie ends off. I wasn't expecting to spend 45 minutes with this, but I also just kind of kept carrying on with side stuff and goofy little stories. So yeah, that's it for this. I enjoyed this movie. Maybe no one else will, but I enjoyed this. It kind of reminded me of those old horror movies where eventually they would have these weird concepts that really just made no sense. But then, they tried to explain it and explain it more to make you think that oh yeah, I should understand this now. And there's sometimes where they desperately try to break it into common a common term, or common layman's terms, or a common denominator that would help you understand what it is. And then you're like, oh great, why didn't you just say that in the first place? Because that's always what everyone says. Why not just say that in the first place? Why did you have to say all that complicated jargon? Come on. So, with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.